of last year.
Oh, thank you so much. I very much appreciate your support.
Well, I have been a huge fan of yours since I read The Course in Miracles in the 80s, and I really didn't get it until I read your book, A Return to Love. I was so grateful for that. And I know the rest of the world is grateful for all of the books that you've given us. But I'm just excited today to talk to you about some of the issues that are very close to your heart, but that are also extremely close to my heart, which have to do with our failing public educational system, our prison industrial complex here in America, the poisoning of food and water, and our loss of civil liberties in the U.S. I notice, especially with the GMOs, that you go way back. When I was looking at your book, Healing, what is it, Healing the Soul of America?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you were way on the cutting edge in the 90s about GMOs, and I only found out about it a few years ago, but I'm so grateful for you leading that march with Monsanto against GMOs.
Well, all of these issues, not just the GMOs, but everything else you mentioned, certainly the issue of prisons and so forth, was already happening back in 1997 when I wrote my book. But we have a way in this culture, much to our detriment, I believe, of waking up and seeking to seriously address problems after they've already become way too big. And we need to change our way of looking on a societal realm to something that we already know about in our personal lives, and that is if there's a little bit of a problem, address it while it's still a little bit of a problem.
Yep.
So the corporate hegemony, the financial sort of takeover of the functioning of the U.S. government and the de-democratization that resulted from that, there were enough people, you know, the poor and suffering in the world are always like canaries in the mine. They take the hits first.
Yes.
Wherever there's a serious problem, whether it's in this country or around the world. So if you are looking at the world from any kind of an enlightened perspective, you look at how the least among us are doing.
Yes.
And number one, that's the morally correct thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But also know that if it's a stress point that is being already a burden among the least, quote-unquote, least among us, it's going to get to everybody else soon enough.
I agree 100%. And, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that we take too long before we wake up. And a lot of it has to do with the misinformation that is just prevalent in the media, and it's really hard. I know when I first got interested in GMOs, there wasn't enough information or studies on the real detrimental effects of it. We had to kind of guess about it, but I tell you what, when I got the facts and the research, I was on it, and I mean committed, and I know I was late, but I'm still there, and I'm happy that there are people like you that are on the forefront bringing this message and beating the drums for us.
Well, I think that there are a lot of people who are very clear and very concerned about the things that you're mentioning here. I think millions of Americans are really waking up to a lot of things.
Yes.
Whether it's the NSA spying or the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the National Defense Authorization Act or the fact that we have the second highest child poverty rate among all advanced nations, second only to Romania,
mm-hmm.
or the GMOs in our food, or the highest incarceration rate in the world. I don't think the problem is that there aren't enough Americans waking up to these things, although I do think many of those facts, such as the child poverty rate and the high incarceration rate, are new to a lot of people. The problem is not with the American people. The problem is with the U.S. government
mm-hmm. and
the gap that has existed between the consciousness of the people and the behavior of the government. This is why I decided to run for office, because many people are talking about these things, but not too infrequently we're actually using these ideas as basis for platforms,
mm-hmm.
candidate platforms,
yes.
actual political campaigns. Now, on one hand, I understand why people, have just thrown up our hands and said, well, forget the political system. they're the ones that created the problem.
Right.
How can we look at that to deliver us from the problem?
Exactly.
But that leaves us in a terrible conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that many of us realize that there's a certain point at which there's only so much you can do from the sidelines.
Yes.
At a certain point, I think we need to start running candidacies based on these ideas. And if enough of us do this, then it becomes a real evolutionary movement with real political heft.
Yeah, I saw that potential with you. Back with Dennis Kucinich when he was working to get together the Department of Peace, I was working with him with groups of students, and I supported Ariana Huffington. And of course, I totally jumped on your bandwagon, and I really am hoping that the time is right now for just, if you get one person in there that can appeal to the people, then more people will have the courage to do what you're doing. And I read the article in the LA Times. They were very, very favorable. You're on the cover of the LA Times.
Yes, today.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it was extremely favorable. The only thing they said was, we don't think she's going to have a chance at winning.
Well, that was a political operative. Of course, a Democratic operative is going to say that, like, duh.
Well, yeah, of course. But I do feel that you were smart to choose the 33rd District. You've got Dr. Beckwith, that whole group over there. It is a very progressive district, and of course you got help, I know, from my end over here with young people that will be supporting from over here and working to raise awareness and support for your campaign, because I think it's time to bring spirituality and intelligence and integrity into politics, because it's not like this machinery is just gonna go away overnight. We've got to get some kind of hedgeway into it.
Well, absolutely. The kind of effort that needs to be made, as I was saying earlier, needs to be in a sense of a real national movement. I'm running as an independent because I think that the chokehold that the two major parties have on our system is part of the problem.
Yes.
They sort of suck all the energy, all the oxygen out of our public discourse. JFK said we need to seek not the Democratic answer or the Republican answer, but the right answer.
I agree.
And if we get if we get enough independent candidates, even 18 or so, in the House of Representatives, that will help break the chokehold. Many of the things that you were talking about, our mass incarceration rate and child poverty and GMOs, the political status quo is not even discussing these things.
I agree.
And that's obviously because we have a legalized system of bribery and corruption in our society today, where both major political parties are so beholden to their corporate and individual funders that it becomes very difficult for a politician to feel that they can get in office or stay in office without towing the line.
Yeah.
And so moneyed forces wield such disproportionate influence on our political functioning compared to that which is wielded by the average citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for there to be an interruption of that pattern, it's silly to look to the status quo to change it. We need to change it by running candidacies ourselves. And we need to put aside our own cynicism and our own anger and just get about the work. Because, if I win my race, for instance, I think that will help create a space that will inspire other people to run on these same kinds of things. And I'm sure people all over the country are doing it and thinking about it. So, since Citizens United, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure your listeners know, that really absurdly unfortunate Supreme Court decision that came down in 2010, the Supreme Court gave permission on an unlimited and anonymous basis to, whether it's, corporate money, union money, individual money, to just flood the campaign issues, the issues campaigns during election seasons. And that kind of money becomes almost guaranteed to affect our elections. The only way that we can override that is through a constitutional amendment. So I support that, and there is a movement both inside Congress, Al Franken and others, as well as outside with groups like Move to Amend, Robert Reich, Common Cause. There's already an effort. There's already a... excuse me for my cough.
Okay.
There's already an effort bubbling up in our society to start the movement towards a constitutional amendment that would outlaw the undue influence of money on our system. Because right now, Lincoln's government of the people, by the people, and for the people has already become, for all intents and purposes, a government of a few of the people, and by a few of the people, and for a few of the people. And if we're going to change, this is how I look at it, if we're going to change that most basic social contract between our government and our people, then we should certainly be having a passionate conversation about it. And that's what, obviously, you and I are doing here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Oh, and I'm so excited that you reminded the audience about that constitutional. It's just a debacle of a democracy to allow politicians to be bought and sold and not have the voice of the people taken into consideration. And I think that that is what has led to so much apathy among the public about politics. And you pointed out in your book, Healing the Soul of America, that it's not so much that people are apathetic about politics, but we're disgusted with it. And I have to admit, in the 2000 election, when it was stolen, I really got disgusted. And we're talking about someone who had gotten invited to the White House by Clinton for all the work that I did with young people and celebrities in his reelection. And I just felt like, wow, we have no voice and they're making fun of us, and what is the point? But, you see, I did finally, it's been a long time now, I jumped right back on the bandwagon when I heard, as soon as I heard that you were running. I thought, well, this is something I can get behind, and it's hope, you know, for the future. And we do need hope.
Well, we do need hope, but hope is born of participation in hopeful solutions.
Yes.
And you can't embrace your cynicism and your hope at the same time.
I got you.
I always say cynicism is just an excuse for not helping.
I agree, and I'm putting my cynicism behind, and I'm going full speed ahead because I see something that's actually worth getting behind. And you made another really cogent point. You said that our greatest political power is to fear nothing and love everything. We're going into commercial break, but when we come back, I'd really like for you to talk to the audience about how we can move beyond our fear of not having any power in this process. You're listening to Divine Love Talk, and my guest, Marianne Williamson, who is running for the 33rd District here in Los Angeles. Okay, we're back with more of Divine Love Talk with Dr. Parthenia Grant. And I have my, Marianne, I'd like to introduce you to my co-host, Kim Michaels, joining us from Estonia. Kim, he is our expert on spirituality and the ego. I'd like to get your thought on how we can bring more love and less fear into this whole arena of politics. We have Marianne Williamson on the line.
Yeah, I think it's necessary to do exactly what Marianne is doing, bring that spiritual perspective, and she obviously has that very unique perspective based on the Course in Miracles and all of the books she has written. And I wanted to say that, as I've said before on the show, I grew up in Denmark and I moved to the United States in '87 and lived for 22 years in the States. And it became my second home, of course. But the one thing that struck me is that there is a public perception in the U.S. that we were the first democracy, we're the most democratic nation in the world, but I have actually never been in a country where there's such a distrust of the government by the people.
Yeah.
And I really think that you touched upon it earlier, Marianne, when you talked about this, that we actually need to start loving things and approaching it with love, because I have over the years met many, many spiritual people who are the kind of people that can bring change because they are aware. But many of them indulge themselves in so much either conspiracy theories or negativity that they actually feel it's hopeless to do anything.
Yes.
So why even try?
Yes.
And that's why I think that people like you can really bring a unique perspective into the whole political scene.
Well, thank you, Kim, for that. Kim is joining us from Estonia, and he brings an international following to the show, Marianne. So I'd like for you to pick up on that.
Well, we were the first country founded on democratic principles. We weren't the first democracy, but we weren't the first. But we were the first country founded on as a democracy. I think that in terms of where we are now, though, Tim is unfortunately absolutely correct. There are other countries who are embodying the democratic principles on which we purport to stand much more fully than we are.
Yes.
And as a consequence, also as Tim said, the American people have a profound distrust in many ways. And I think the fact that we are so distrusting right now is the good news. I think it's good news that people are going, what the heck is going on, when you have NSA spying, when you have the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the government to indefinitely detain American citizens, when in our name the United States is waging a drone war elsewhere and bringing drones, by the way, for quote-unquote peaceful purposes to the United States within the next couple of years. When we have the Patriot Act. So I think that the fact that people are mistrustful today is the good thing. The issue, though, which has serious spiritual as well as political implications, is where do we go with that mistrust?
Right.
And you and I talked earlier about, cynicism, and the conversation that I think is so important now is that we repudiate not only the the aristocratic system that has reappeared in our midst, but also that we repudiate cynicism, we repudiate anger, we repudiate the demonization of individuals as opposed to the holding of systems accountable, and that we really stand on the kind of spiritual principles which have been the underpinnings of all the great social justice movements in the United States throughout our history, including the founding of our country. Dr. Grant, one of the things that I find fascinating, and I don't know how aware you are, of the role of the Quakers.
Yes, I am.
Yes, I mean, both in the founding of this country, in the abolitionist movement, in the women's suffrage movement. Both Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were Quakers. And, of course, Dr. King was a Baptist preacher, the Southern Christian Leadership Council. So this idea of a spiritual dimension, a spiritual foundation for the next great wave of political force in America, this is not breaking from the larger historical narrative of social justice movements in the United States. It is in keeping with the great historical narrative. And I think getting that out to people is so important. It's not just that spirituality has never had anything to do with the United States moving forward. It has always been the basis for the great leaps forward.
I thank you for reminding us of that, because I do feel like you stepping into the arena, we're coming back full circle, because it's very clear with our Constitution that our founding fathers were very much in touch with spirit and brought us some extremely enlightened principles that I hold very, very dear. And as an educator, my real concern on college campuses is freedom of speech and loss of academic freedom. You are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant, my co-host Kim Michaels from Estonia, and my special guest Marianne Williamson, who is running for the 33rd Congressional District, and we are supporting her wholeheartedly. We'll be back after commercial break. All right, I'm so thrilled to be back with you at Divine Love Talk on CRN. I'm Dr. Parthenia Grant, and I have Marianne Williamson with us today live, and my co-host Kim Michaels joining us from Estonia. Marianne, you pointed out in your book, Healing the Soul of America, which, by the way, you were way ahead of your time, but I think that everything in that book is still relevant today because, things didn't get better since you wrote the book. But I think that we are moving towards a rising consciousness where people are now able to rally around someone who is speaking their language. But you did point out in the book that the issue is the disengagement of the average American's heart from the democratic process. And you said that we have stopped participating in droves, leaving undesirable forces to take over, and that there's not enough spirit of true rebellion in America because pleasure has been used to control us as effectively as pain. Now, that is very, very cogent. So how do we address that?
Well, you heal in life by noticing. You heal in life one aha at a moment.
Okay.
American democracy is not just broken in Washington. It's broken in our minds and in our hearts. We have disengaged. We have allowed politics to become a spectator sport.
We did.
We've allowed the i.e. control, quote unquote, to lie in the hands of a political class as opposed to where it was initially meant to be, and that is in the hands of the people.
Yes.
So if you democratic rights are like a muscle.
Yes.
If you stop exercising them, they start to wither away because there will always be people happy to take over the field that you just abdicated.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's true that there's a theft of our democracy going on, but I also think it's true that many of us need to take responsibility for the ways in which we left the windows and the doors open.
Mm-hmm.
If all you do is show up for the presidential race and the presidential election every 4 years, that is not enough to play the role of citizen in the vigorous and responsible way that the people of the United States need to participate if we are going to protect and foster and pass on to our children a vital democracy. But, I think what's happening here, it is the 11th hour, but it isn't midnight yet. And I think, Tim was talking before about how Americans are and how Americans are seen. Winston Churchill once said, Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after we have exhausted every other option. I think, Tim, you were saying you're either from Denmark or you've lived in Denmark.
Yeah.
There are
Yes,
many
I grew up in Denmark.
Yeah, many Western democracies just roll their eyes about Americans because we are distracted for too long.
Mm-hmm.
We go into a stupor too long. We aren't smelling the coffee for too long. But I think other nations also recognize something very interesting about us, and that is when we do wake up, we slam it like nobody's business. And so I think that this is a moment. I now think we have a critical mass, and that is my hope for this new constituency
Yes.
that is rising in our midst. I believe that there are now a critical mass of Americans on both sides of the political spectrum, by the way,
Okay.
particularly when it comes to these civil liberties issues.
Yes.
We're sitting up and going, what the heck is going on in this country? You've got to be kidding me.
Yes.
And I think at a certain point we start looking to our own government and asking whose side they're on.
Oh, absolutely. And for me in academia, Marianne, when my college tells me that they're spying on student emails and Facebooks and phone calls, I'm just like, what?
Not only that, we're going to have drones in our country. Within 2 years, they're starting to come. And we're being told that they're coming to be used by Amazon.com and FedEx
mm-hmm.
and law enforcement to catch the quote-unquote bad guys.
Wow.
But when you've got, let's remember what the technology in a drone is.
Okay.
They will know what room you just walked into, who you slept with,
Yes.
what you just logged onto on your internet.
Yes.
And in a country where we have already, through the National Defense Authorization Act, allowed the government to legally detain American citizens indefinitely, the idea that drones will be flying through the skies of the United States, as though it's not bad enough what drone warfare is doing in our name throughout the world,
Yes.
killing thousands and thousands of innocent men, women, and children. So this is not a time for disengagement. This is not a time, but we must play this very, very carefully. We must keep it centered in love. We must keep it centered in peace.
Mm-hmm.
Only a peaceful, nonviolent movement can even get the job done. And I think that it is time to be concerned because, as you've said several times on this program, I talked about these things in 1997 in my book, Healing the Soul of America. The word inertia means the tendency of the object to move in whatever direction it's been moving until and unless there is the introduction of a counterforce. So this problem, this cancer in our midst, has just been growing. And it's time for a serious pattern interruption here.
Well,
it's time for a serious intervention, but I don't think it's going to come from the political status quo.
No.
It's going to come from the people ourselves.
Well, I'm certainly ready for an intervention, and you pointed out that every new generation must relearn and recommit to the foundations of democracy. As a professor, I do know that I have to repeat things that this new generation, thinks is ancient history or just didn't know anything about. And you just pointed out something with the drones that I thank you, because I didn't even think about the other capacity. I just read about the fact that Amazon was going to be using drones to deliver, our products. But I am quite aware that Big Brother has been watching us, is watching us, and Orwell's 1984 has become a horrifying reality, and that truly disturbs me, which is why I'm so excited to jump on the bandwagon of someone like you who has the courage to actually speak in a very loving but profound way about the real issues, and you're not afraid to speak the truth.
Well, you know, it's like they've already admitted the NSA spying, which they only had to admit because of Edward Snowden, of course.
Yeah.
So if we know that the NSA is spying, why would we be so naive as to think that, I mean, you know what I'm saying? If they're going to employ phone records. And so the drones, the point is, we would not have the capability as citizens to look up in the sky and know, is that a FedEx drone?
Right.
Is it an Amazon? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then the article I saw in the paper that was so hilarious to me, although tragic as well, was where when someone in the government, when asked about privacy concerns, said that the average American need not worry because they will be under the law, all state, federal, and local privacy laws.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is from a government who admits NSA spying.
It's such a joke.
But it's a very serious, and the good news here, once again, and that I think all of us should be aware of, people on the right are as concerned about this as people on the left.
That's true.
That is the good news.
Very good news.
You know, there's so many ways in which people look at the two political parties, major political parties, and say, oh, they're more polarized than ever.
Yeah.
But I think that's just a canard. That's just an obfuscation. I think the real problem is that they are more similar than ever.
I agree. You know, Joseph Campbell pointed that out about the world religions. He said, you know, everybody looks at the differences, and what he sees is the similarities. And I did notice what you're talking about, and that does give me hope because I think everybody should be concerned about our privacy.
Yeah. Now, what I was talking about, though, in terms of the two parties' similarities, I was not pointing to a positive thing. I was pointing to a negative thing, and that's how much they're both, for all intents and purposes, bought and sold by their corporate benefactors.
Yeah. No, I was referring to the fact that there is concern on both sides about privacy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because no matter what side of the political spectrum you are on, that triggers an American. We don't want that. We don't like it. We don't want it. Nobody would, and that's a good thing that we're willing to say so.
I am too. And, you know, another point that you made in your book is that we fail to follow in our founding fathers' repudiation of injustice. I thought that was profound and very, very true, and it is time, way past time, for us to get back in those footsteps.
You know, we should not, and I think most of us do not minimize the fact that many of those men who bequeathed those democratic principles were themselves slave owners.
Oh, I agree.
So this country was born of and has always been marked by this juxtaposition between our constitutional dedication to the most enlightened principles and forces within our country that were there in the earliest days of our republic and are there today, which would actually limit the democratic franchise for somebody, whether it was slavery, whether it was then women, whether it's gay marriage. And I think what's happening today is that the democratic franchise is being limited for the average American, no matter who we are.
I agree.
It's just there's a kind of citizen lockout occurring, where, you know, citizens, just the average American citizen, locked out of access to fundamental political influence, locked out of access to educational opportunity, locked out of access to capital and economic opportunity. And these things did not happen mysteriously. They happened because of very specific policies, beginning in the 1980s, tax policies, banking policies, trade policies that have formed this accumulated chronic pattern, this systemic pattern of siphoning off major portions of the material resources of this country and placing them in the hands of a very few, to the point where 1%, for instance, controls up to 40% of our wealth, and 60% of our people are living on 2.3% of our wealth. This is not only undemocratic, it's not only unethical, it's not only unjust, it's unsustainable.
Yes. And
it's a brew for some very serious social unrest that could occur if we do not right this situation.
I agree, and it's better late than never, and you're right, it's not the, midnight, but we are getting close. And another point you made is that what we need is not so much a visionary leader or a visionary media, but a visionary constituency. And I think bringing these issues to the forefront and being able to talk about them openly on national media, which we're on with CREN, actually international, that gives me hope. I'm very grateful to be a part of that process. Kim, I'm sure you might have some thoughts about the issues that Marianne just brought up.
Yeah, definitely. One of the issues that I was thinking about was that of people not feeling represented by the government. And I lived in the United States in 1996 when Ross Perot was running for president. And it doesn't matter whether I agree with Ross Perot or not, but the point is that 8% of the American people voted for him. But after the election, they had no seats in Congress, meaning that they were not represented.
Yeah.
In most European countries, he would have had 8% of the seats in the parliament.
Right.
And that means that the people who voted for him would have felt that their vote wasn't wasted,
yes,
and that there was an alternative to the two established parties. And I think that would be very, very important to create something like that in America.
Absolutely. Marianne.
Well, what he's referring to there is the fact that we don't have a parliamentary system.
Yeah.
What he refers to is what occurs in a parliamentary system, and unfortunately we do have a winner-take-all system.
Yeah.
That's not going to be changing. That's foundational.
So how do we address it, Marianne?
Well, part of the problem, a way to address that is real democracy, as long as real democracy occurs. But we have this lockout that I was referring to. If you don't have either private wealth or access to wealth, good luck trying to run for office in the United States today. So if we do get the constitutional amendment that would outlaw the undue influence of money on our system, then what you have is you've paved the way for Congress to pass legislation that would allow for federal funding of our political campaigns, our federal campaigns. Also, I wouldn't mind compulsory voting.
Yeah.
I think if we have compulsory jury duty.
Yeah.
Canada has compulsory voting. Australia has compulsory voting. I think if all Americans had to vote or pay a fine, we would have a completely different country.
Okay. Well,
and there are, we're living at a time where there are people seeking to limit voting rights. If anything, we should that's one of the ways that we need to expand the democratic franchise. I think probably we should vote on a Saturday, or at least a national holiday, rather than a Tuesday. I think registration shouldn't be so complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, there are just so many ways that the franchise is being narrowed. And until then, the fact that we are not a parliamentary system, as Tim was just saying, we will continue to see our own influence, the influence of people, begin to wane. What we have now is more influence of money, less influence by the people. We need to get the money out and get the people back in.
Well, I think you're right. That's the new order of the day, and I'm adding that to my list of causes that I will be working on. I would also like to see a system where when we vote that the votes are not stolen or not counted, and that we have like a secondary system that actually backs up.
Yeah, you think? Like a paper ballot?
Right.
Hello, have you noticed that? Yeah, I mean, we have in many ways developed a system of legalized corruption in the United States.
Yeah.
And this is only going to change. People talk about people need to demand change. I don't think it's about demanding change. It's about effectuating change.
I agree.
And we effectuate it by running more people as candidates.
Okay.
On these kinds of issues, and actually doing what it takes to win these elections.
Okay, and so what will it take? What can we do to help you more?
Well, thank you. If people go to my website, marianneforcongress.com, then you will see the many ways that people can join in and participate. And we have an I Gave 5 campaign. It's extremely expensive to run a political campaign. And I always say if everybody who is exposed to the ideas of this campaign and agrees with those ideas sends $5,
okay,
then I think I can be competitive.
All right, then. I like that. So give us the website again.
MarianneForCongress.com.
All right. We want MarianneForCongress.com. We will be back after commercial break, wrapping this up. Thank you so much, Marianne and Kim Michaels, for joining us after commercial break. Okay, we're back, wrapping this up on Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant and my co-host Kim Michaels joining us from Estonia, and our special guest Marianne Williamson, who is running for the 33rd District of Congress in Los Angeles. So Marianne, what would you like to leave the audience with today that is close to your heart?
What's close to my heart is a reading of history. In the United States, we had slavery, but we abolished it. Women didn't have rights, but we created women's suffrage. African Americans lived under the Jim Crow laws and suppression, and then we had the civil rights movement. This is not the first time that America has swerved from its own ethical and democratic center. In the past, the course correction that was necessary occurred because of citizens who did what it took to make that happen. And I just hope we won't be the first generation of Americans to wimp out on the task of writing what needs to be righted. For me, it gives me a lot of inspiration and motivation and courage and hope when I recognize that other generations before us have done what needed to be done to get America back her democratic bearings, and we have even more of the possibilities and the advantages than did former generations. They simply looked at the situation and said, okay, let's make this happen, and I think it's our time, and let's make this happen.
Okay, I'm with you 100%, and I think that cleaning up the food supply and the water and the air will help all of us think more clearly, Marianne, because there's so many booby traps in all of that. So we're going to press on with those social causes and supporting people like you who are in it to change. And Kim, would you give us a closing remark?
Yeah, I think it is really exciting that people who are spiritual like Marianne want to get into politics, because I don't believe we have a political crisis in the United States. I believe we have a spiritual crisis.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So, Marianne, you can close the show.
Thank you so much. I think in recognizing that money in politics, it's the cancer underlying these other cancers. It's the issue underlying these other issues. And all of these other social issues, whether income inequality, high child poverty rate, high mass incarceration rate, the corruption of our food supply, these are all derivative. These are all effects, the real cause of which has to do with this corruption of our political system by moneyed forces. Mm-hmm. And I think all of us on this phone call realize that the revolution has to begin with the revolution of the heart.
I agree.
It's something in our own thinking.
Yeah, and as an educator, I know that the whole money thing has trickled down in education, and it has not helped us get a better educational system. It's much more political, and it's much more corrupt. It's not about the students in public education
Absolutely.
anymore.
Something we need to stand on so strongly is not only universally available preschool, because of these children who can't read, because they didn't go to preschool and they're behind their little kindergarten counterparts. They're behind on day one.
Absolutely.
And if we don't catch them up within 2 years, they're on a 50% statistical trajectory to incarceration.
Absolutely.
And by the 4th grade, build a prison bed. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation, to both of you. And the more we have this conversation, the more power it will have. Thank you so much for including me.
Thank you. And we definitely want to have you back. Thank you, Marianne Williamson, for joining us on Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant.